So before I get into the quick start guide for how to use GameTouch, I want to cover off on what GameTouch is and what GameTouch is not, and a couple of our core features and philosophies. So what it is an advanced touchscreen peripheral software like a keyboard, mouse, or joystick, and what it is not is a bot or cheat program for automation or creating unfair advantages. The advantage you get is not having to remember every single command in your application or software. Some of the core features: no accounts, no subs, no data collection, no ads, single one-time purchase, operates purely on your LAN, so it doesn't reach out to the internet except for the server to check for updates. Fully customizable profiles so that you can make your touchscreen experience completely to your liking. Connect as many of them as you like with a single purchase, so you can connect 100 tablets to the single server if you want to, and have analog inputs via a custom virtual joystick driver and custom gamepad drivers. Some of the core philosophies to achieving this stuff is respect user privacy. I mean, if you don't use the product yourself, it's likely not that good, right? I use this software every day in both games and applications. Be part of the solution. Make it user friendly. Where possible, I've tried to keep all the complexity in the back end of the software so it's not user facing, and always try and improve on the product where it is. The last thing I'll say is I would recommend completely uninstalling the current versions that you do have, or installing these versions, and or uninstalling VJoy if you don't use it for anything else, as the software doesn't need VJoy anymore. I'll move straight into the quick start guide. First thing, go to gametouchcontroller.com/downloads, and then scroll down till you get to the server installer. Click that and download the server installer. Once it's downloaded, run the installer. You'll get a standard sort of Windows installer. It'll ask you if you want to create the shortcuts as an administrator. Some software, especially some games, require the application to be run as an administrator to send the commands. My recommendation is to leave that checked, but you can always uncheck it and go back and run it as an admin later if that way. Once that's done, it'll ask you to, if you want to install the drivers. If you've already installed a previous version of this version of the software, you can leave that unchecked. I'd leave it checked for now. It doesn't matter if you leave it checked, and then whether or not you want to run the server. So we'll go through. It'll install the new custom virtual joystick driver and gamepad driver, and then close and load the application. So the next thing you want to do is install it on your tablet device. So you can go to the App Store and search for GameTouch controller. If you can't find it on the website, you can scroll down and you can click these links, and while you're on your device, that will take you to the relevant link on the relevant store for your device. Once that's installed, you can load up both of them. Something like this. Then on the server, go and push the start button here on the server. It's going to check if you already have firewall rules, and if you don't, it's going to ask you to install the firewall rules so that the client can connect. You can, if you want to manage your own network, do start anyway and ignore the firewall rules. But if you just want the software to create the rules for you, you can hit the create rules button. It'll bring up the prompt to create the firewall rules, then you can continue and the server will be running. It tells you down in the bottom left here all of the server details. Server, which is this PC, for those people who don't know what a server is, its address, essentially the address of your router or the gateway port, and then the firewall rules and how they're applied. Then on the client, once you load it up, you can either choose to just leave it as my device, or you can go into config, change the name of it here to be whatever you want. Go back and just hit connect. It will connect to the server. It'll tell you both the server details and the details of your device down here. And then you just simply go to a profile. There's a couple of default ones included, like the Space Sim one. Load the profile will load, and you'll be up and running. Now, in the default Space Sim profile, I've included a message to please read it. It just says things like you can edit it, change it however you like, it doesn't matter, and that if something happens with your Star Citizen control bindings, it's not the software that does that, because you have essentially connected another device. Star Citizen's way it handles devices is if you connect something or disconnect something, it can reorder them, and so what you had as an order in Star Citizen may get changed. Just for that to be clear, it's not the app that does this, it's Star Citizen reordering controls. It tells you here you can go into the action maps file and order them, but that's a very Star Citizen specific thing. Now, if you want to get rid of this message, it's simple to go back to the server, open the editor, go to profiles, select the Space Sim profile, load it, select widgets, then just click each one, hit remove, and you can either hit the sync button that's inside here in the editor, or you can go back and hit the sync button here. It will go through and ask you if you want to overwrite, you just hit yes. It will sync the client, and then the client will be updated. Now, of course, if you want to, you can replace whatever's the blank section here with your own imagery and stuff like that, but that's in a more detailed on how to create your own imagery and stuff. And that's essentially QuickStart guide. If you hit back on the server, you have your log here of what's happening, and if we go into any panels and press the buttons, we can see that this is all working, and we can see that the joysticks are working too. And that's essentially QuickStart guide, and the application's up and running. So the next thing I added to both the server and client is the ability to distribute important information or messages, so that in the case that something has to change, and there's no really way to notify everyone and people have Discord muted, I accept that. So the way this works is whenever you connect, and once every hour, the server will check the website to see if there's any important messages. So if we open up the website now and have a look, we'll see that there's important notices on the homepage that just says this is a test 6. Now if I go back to the server and connect, it's going to check the server version, and it's also going to come up with any important messages to read. If I connect the client, it's going to do the same thing. This isn't connecting to the internet, it's talking to the server, and the server saying, hey, look, there's a important message, here it is, and it shows the client. Now this isn't going to happen every time, it's only going to be when this message has changed. So now, for example, this is a test 6, that was a message, you can acknowledge and close it. Same on the server side. Now if I was to disconnect the server and reconnect again, it's going to check the message, but because it hasn't changed, it's not going to bring it up in your face. But if, for example, and the same is true for the client. because we've still got our auto load profile, keeps automatically loading when we connect, but you're not going to get the message if it hasn't changed. But if I had to, for example, go into the website and changed it, I just change it to release of new version nearly ready, and I save that. So now this is the new message. If I was to then disconnect the server or wait an hour, it's going to come up with release of new version nearly ready. That's going to come up with the new message. So that way it's not obtrusive, nothing changes, you carry on. But if, for example, let's say someone found a bunch of bugs in the default space sim profile, I can go in and make that message say, look, there's a new version of the default space sim profile for download. You can go and download it and update your devices without you having to go through like a full client or full server update or something like this. Or in the current case where server version was offline because I was working on this messaging system, then that sort of message can be distributed to all the devices. And the same is going to be true on the client side. And you'll get that message regardless of which screen that you have loaded. So you could be in profile loaded up doing stuff, and if on the hour there's an important message, it'll come up on top of the profile, which you can then get a big button here to acknowledge and close. What I want to go through now is all of the significant changes that have been made both to the client and to the server. I'll go through each of the panels one by one, so hopefully I don't miss anything. Before I do that, I'll cover off on some of like the core changes that I wanted to make with the application. I wanted to sort of declutter everything, make the tablet side a lot more just user facing, and put a lot of the workload or essentially workflows back onto the server end. This creates a bunch of advantages. It allows for easier updating. It allows me to sort of manage how those updates and widgets are changed in the future with less updates required on the client side, and also move to a different format for creating essentially the profiles in the back end so that they're a lot more future-proof compatible with newer versions that get iterated. So in terms of like the user experience, I wanted everything to be a bit more crisp. I suppose in a sense less 80s. If you notice, like on the client and both the server now, this is the new UI design. Everything is much quicker to get to and from certain features. The Windows version has a full screen button here to make it full screen. And then this is essentially it. There's no like 2 pages deep to do everything. The client is all sort of on the front here, and you just have your list of profiles that you can load and load profile. In the config, you can put your load on connect, so when you connect, it'll automatically load a profile for you. But essentially, that's kind of the philosophy. Make it simpler. What I'll do now is I'll go through each of the server and client in a bit more detail and what each of the features are. Start with the server side. So the first button in here, the config, there's a few more options now and also a few less options. So I suppose I'll start with what got taken out, at least for now, and then go into what sort of the new features are. So I took out, at least in the short term, the Twitch integration. I'm looking to add that back in the future, but in a much better and simpler way. And I took out, as part of like the new design philosophy, moving away from like Star Citizen specific niche widgets and tools, to make it more generic and applicable to all software and games, but at the same time keep those like features and usability in some way. And we'll see that when we get to seeing the new sort of shield face um, panel and stuff like that. But if we go into config, port, this is the standard port that the network operates on. You can now have a password, so you can set up server-side password and passwords on the clients if you wish to. That way, if you do port forwarding, so people can connect to your server over the internet, you get security there. Play button sounds in the editor and also receive button sounds. So in the past, there was a single button sound for everything. Now you can individually set button sounds for both press and release. And you can choose to either play them in the editor, which we'll see soon, when they're received from the server, or both. Like as an example, if you're wearing a headset, playing the sounds on your tablet isn't likely going to be useful at all, so you can choose to send them to the server and have the server play the sounds. Client disconnection stops macros, so now if you have a looping macro running or something like that, like a ping that continuously runs or something, and you disconnect the client, you can choose to make sure that that stops any running macros when a client disconnects. Or let's say you wanted to do something to stop yourself going AFK, you can have that running macros to not do that, and so you can turn your phone off or disconnect it, and the server will keep running that for you in the background. The enable Xbox virtual controller. So the joysticks is not a big issue, but if you already use a controller for certain games and you don't want to have the virtual controller on all the time, you can just turn it on and off here. And just bring up the USB game controllers. So have the custom 128 button virtual joystick. Don't use VJoy anymore. I still have it installed just to check compatibility, doesn't interfere or whatever, interacts fine with it. But essentially now you can clearly identify which is which. And if I just go into the server and disable that, you'll see that it immediately disappears. The next thing is logging. So verbose logging by default will be turned off. And the reason for that is when you turn verbose logging on, it has a bit of a chunky impact on performance. You may or may not notice it depending on your machine, but it will literally kind of like log everything to your PC. So if you do have errors, then you can turn this on, try and replicate the error, and then send me the logs, or you can connect to my server and I can grab them from you. See that when we get to the file manager. So we can have a better way now of actually diagnosing issues, which you didn't really have in the past. The next thing is the profile exit button color. So by default, it's white. You can change it to sort of black or transparent. And we'll see this when we get in there, so you can have like a truly uncluttered UI. Get into the editor. And this option is also on the client. So that essentially covers the config and what lives in there. And now we're going to go through the file manager. So the file manager, you've got 5 buttons in here. The open custom assets folder. This is going to bring up the like folder in Windows where all your custom assets get placed if you want to make your own profile. So if we press that, in here will be all of the folders that contain the custom assets. So if you want to add your own backgrounds, you can just drop them in here. If you want to add your own buttons and stuff, you can drop them in here. They don't have to be named anything specific anymore. They can just be named whatever, but you just put your images in there. And for background images, for all of the image stuff, it accepts JPEG, either JPE or JPG versions, PNG, and also Gifs, and we'll go into how Gifs work in a bit. For fonts, it's just your standard TrueType fonts, .ttfs. For sounds, it's just WAV files. And then you'll see other folders inside here for presets, and we'll see that when we get into the editor, what gets saved in those. The next 2 buttons we have is import and export profile. So when you want to export a profile, I'm just going to use, these are some of the ones that I have at the moment. I'll use Gamepad as an example. When I export that, it's going to grab profile, all of the associated assets, and package it into a zip file. It's not an issue anymore with renaming the zip files after it's packaged. You can rename them whatever you want. And when you export it, it's going to tell you that it's done and where it put it. And again, if we want to see that, we can go into exported profiles folder. So when you open the custom assets folder, it puts you in here. If you just go up one level, it'll put you to the up one level folder, I suppose. And then if you go to exported profiles, you'll see where the exported profiles are here. You can see that I actually exported one yesterday. And when you do an export now, it does essentially the profile name and then the date and then .dg profile. So you can sort of keep track of, like, if you're constantly making new versions and exporting them, it's on a new day, it'll put the new day there. And if we go back and look at importing, if we import a profile, by default it opens up your exported profiles folder, just so if you're like using it as a way to create backups, but you can just navigate, you know, like any other file menu, single click to go back up, change drive letters, etc. But if we go to import now, I'm going to import the one that I just exported. It's going to tell me that I already have Gamepad, obviously because I just exported it, I still have it. And if I want to override it or create a new version, now there's like the next option you're going to get is whether you want to overwrite or create new assets. So in this case, I'm just going to create a new version because I don't want to overwrite Gamepad. What that's going to do is it's going to automatically create a Gamepad underscore v2. And now it's going to ask me if I want to overwrite the assets or create versioned ones. And the reason for this is, so let's say it's not unreasonable to think that nearly everyone is going to create images that are just button.png, right, or button1 or button2 or something like that. You don't want to import their profile and overwrite your button.png or some other profile's button.png. So if you create versioned assets, it's going to create a new version and file name of those assets so they don't overwrite anything that you currently have, and automatically update the profile you import to reference those files. So if I create versioned assets now, it's going to tell me that I imported Gamepad v2 and I imported 29 assets and I versioned 29 assets. Now if I bring up folder here so we can have a look, and I go up one level back into our custom assets, let's just for example go into button images because I did the Gamepad. We'll see now that the Gamepad has created all these version 2 buttons of the exact same thing, so it didn't overwrite my existing ones. So the next thing we have is the request client logs and the open the logs folder. So now when your client's connected, there's obviously no access to the log folder directly on the client inside its container. So what you can do is you can just request any connected client logs from the server. So if I hit request client logs, it's going to tell me that Android tablet is connected. It'll show you any of the devices that are connected. You can just select that and it'll grab all the logs from the client. And you can open the logs folder and it's going to open the logs folder where the server keeps logs. What it's going to do is open up this folder here, and then you can go into client logs. You see you got Android tablet and it's got logs in there that you can check out. And that essentially covers the things that you have now on the file manager. It all should be a lot simpler. Doesn't matter if you rename zip files or anything like that. It's going to import it. You don't have to worry about anything overriding if you don't want to. It will manage that for you. You can just simply import profile, create new versioned assets, and then sync it to the client, and you're going to have no issues. We'll look at now, very simple. Patch notes is just going to bring up whatever the patch notes are for the latest version. Full detailed list of patch notes if they don't all fit. I mean, this will scroll, but on iOS it can't handle too many things in here. So if it's too big, I'll just put a note in here that says, "Hey, go check out the website with there's more detail." So we'll look at now is the new command forwarding, which is essentially what replaced the old turret connection. Those who are familiar with that. So in the past, you could send through like one or two buttons from your joystick that will then trigger like a VJoy control on another server. But now this is a lot more significant. So now you can hit search for network and it will find any servers that you have running on your network and list them all here. Obviously, I don't have any options here because this is me and I don't want to connect to myself. That's kind of absurd. But if it had other ones, then they'd come up in a list with a connect, or you can manually add them. Got a complex network setup, or you don't want to use the automatic feature, just add the IP address in here. I'm just going to use this as an example. It's not an actual server there. Again, if your server has a password, you put that in, hit add, and you'll get that server listed here. And when you connect, it's going to connect to that server, and then your command forwarding is connected. But it's still not running. Two more things you have to do. Over on the right now, rather than just like send through a joystick that you push to a specific one or two buttons, it will show you every device here that isn't the GameTouch devices. Um, the reason for that is you're not going to, everything from the GameTouch application itself will automatically get forwarded if you enable forward. And that will, so if you're running, you start another server on your laptop, and then you send a command from your tablet to server running on your gaming PC, it'll also send that command to the server on the laptop and execute that if it's within sort of the GameTouch client server environment. But if you want to, so for example, use your other devices like your physical sticks or even your gamepad, or in this case, it still sees VJoy, I can set these to forward to another device on the other server. So I can either set it to forward as the joystick or as the gamepad. So tablet commands, whether your keyboard, mouse, joystick, gamepad, or whatever, for the actual GameTouch ones, they will get forwarded as they are, and the server will handle them as they are. But for your physical devices, you can set them to forward as the joystick or gamepad. You set it to the joystick, then it's just going to forward button 1 as button 1, button 2 as button 2, all the axis as the axis there are, because the joystick has like 8 axes and 128 buttons, so you're not going to really exceed that from a single physical device perspective. You can also forward both or multiple devices to a single device on the other end. So in this case, I could send both my Virpil sticks to appear as a singular GTC joystick on the other end. So moving the axis on, pressing the buttons on either one of those will trigger the GTC joystick. Or if I set it to gamepad, then because the gamepad is probably going to have less buttons and axis than device, you can go through and hit set bindings. And this is going to come up and saying, hey, push the A button, essentially go through all of the Xbox buttons and allow you to push whatever button you want on your joystick to correspond to the respective virtual gamepad at the other end. It'll do axis as well. I'm just going to cancel that for now, but you just go through every button, set it up how you want it. And so once that's set up, it's not running yet. You have to, it's all set up to run, but then you can enable or disable forwarding from down here. If it's connected, it's going to let you enable, disable the polling rate. So obviously, because this is going over the network, you can set how many commands per second that you want your device to be able to trigger. By default, it's set to the max of 1,000. But if you've got a very slow network or it's unreliable, etc., you can bring that down at the minimum is 100 times per second. It will send updates. So what I'll do now is I'll quickly cover how the syncing works, and then we'll dive into the editor and see what that looks like now. So I wanted to make the ability to make edits and them appear on the client to be as simple and easy as possible. And so we'll use an example. We'll load this test profile on the client, and as you can see here, it now supports animations, and there's just a bunch of stuff here. It's not relevant. If I go into the editor now on the server, and I load up that test profile, which I've got running on the client. Now I've got that running in the editor, and let's say I don't want these animations anymore, and I don't want this sort of picture up the top here. I can just go to widgets. Oh wait, that's the background. Let's go to, it's in the panels. So if I don't want this background animation anymore, I'm just going to set it to, I don't know, let's say this. It's this metal background. And I don't want this image up here in the corner anymore. I want to move it sort of down there. And then that part I want to be down here. All I can do is I can hit sync in the top right corner up here, or I can hit the sync button here. They'll both do the same thing. And I just hit sync. It's going to come up with a prompt on the server to say cancel overwrite or overwrite always this session. If you push overwrite always this session, it's not going to ask you anymore. It's just going to overwrite whatever's on the client. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to hit overwrite all this session. And it's going to go through and update the client for you. And now the client has been updated. Now if I move these around, etc., let's put it like that, hit sync, it's going to update the client again. Because there's still an overlay animation that plays once, it will replay the animation. You don't see that on the server because it's already played once on the server. But if I unchecked it and rechecked it, then see it here. And that's as simple as it is to update the client when you make changes on the server side. Just move the changes, hit sync, and it'll appear on the client. What I'll do now is I'll go through the editor in detail and all the new features and widgets and everything that you have in that. But before I go through that, I'll cover how Gifs work in order to create the animations. So if you notice here, I have, this is the custom backgrounds folder for the server, and I've put this Crusader Industries GIF in this custom backgrounds folder. Now if I go back to the server and I go to my panels and look at the background, which I now have as this metal, I see the GIF in here. And if I apply the GIF, it's going to apply, that's fine, but then you'll notice that it changes to .zip. The reason for that is to make it the GIFs function cross-platform. What it essentially does is it essentially instantly builds a zip file which contains all of the frames of the GIF in which it plays in order. This gives you some additional benefits, and it removes the GIF so you don't end up with duplicates in there. So if you copy paste it, it will delete the GIF and create the zip. But if we open that up and have a look, inside the zip, you'll see like every frame is in here. The benefit of this, it's very easy to go through and edit the GIF, or what would be the GIF, to delete certain sections of the frame. If you notice, like on the image from before, like this one, it only plays until it gets to here and then stops. That's because I deleted the second half of the animations out of the zip file. It also allows you to use transparent images as part of the animation, so that you can have like a sort of truly animated GIF that has transparency and stuff in it. So that's how the GIFs kind of work in the back end. That's kind of how the sausage is made, so to speak. Just be aware that like when you select a GIF, it'll create it into the zip so that it will work on every device that you have. So if we go to profiles, we'll start here and we'll go through all of the things on the profiles section. Up the top, you have profiles, panels, and widgets. Just toggles between what type of thing you're editing. In this case, we want to make a new profile. So we'll just make this profile for video, something like that. That's just going to have the profile name. So up here, if we set create new profile for video, the next thing it's going to want is the resolution. So every device has its own specific resolution. They will all the profiles will scale to every device. However, this will make sure that when you build it, if you wanted to build it specific for your device, everything will scale perfectly on that screen. So let's say it was, I don't know, a bit wider like a phone, then when you create the buttons and stuff, it will scale exactly what it will look like on your phone, so you can make sure it's schmick. Also, there's a lot of people who wanted to create vertical profiles, and that was kind of challenging in the past because you have the editor rotated and all that sort of cool. But so now, if you want to do that, let's just say 1920 by 1080 is like our standard sort of tablet 16 by 9. All I do is change this to 1080, this to 1920, and now this is what it's going to look like vertically. If the resolution is much bigger than what can fit, the server screen size is 1920 by 1080. This scaled to 1920 by 1080 essentially, so you can't really change that. But if it is bigger, let's say it's like almost double this, like 3500, I don't know, like 2000, it's just going to automatically fit it in here as if that's what it would look like. The next thing is the button delay. So some applications or games in the past didn't work well with press commands because the down up was too fast. So maybe like 25 milliseconds is too fast. This is true for things like Helldivers. That was one example. So now you can set a global button delay on the profile. So any commands you set as a press will be, in this case, 25 milliseconds, but plus or minus 10%. There's a little bit of a random variation in it. So if I set it to 50, as an example, it's going to be either 55 or 45 milliseconds every time a button gets pressed, or somewhere between those. It's going to be, might be 46, then 47, then 50, then 48, and then 52 or whatever. But 25 is the default. And then we can hit create profile. And this gives us our fresh profile window. We can see up the top here, we have the profile that's being edited and also the panel that's being edited. Get into panels in a minute. Then you have an option to save or delete the profile. So let's say I'm working on something and I don't know if what I'm going to do is going to break the profile I already have. Let's go up here, change the name, hit save, and then now if I go to profiles, I'll have profile for video 2. Load that up, and now I'm editing profile for video 2. It's essentially going to be like a duplicate. We'll go back to the first one for now. Alright. Now, you also have delete profile, so I don't want profile for video 2 anymore, so I can just select it, hit delete. It's going to ask me if I want to delete the profile and all the assets that are associated with that profile. So if you hit yes, any widgets and images and everything that you've got associated with this profile will also get deleted. This is more useful for like if you import somebody else's profile and you don't want it anymore and you don't want any of the imagery anymore, so it doesn't clutter up your server, you can do that. Or you can just delete the profile only and leave the assets in the folder for you to use later. I don't have any assets for now, so I'm just going to keep the assets and it's just going to tell me that that was deleted. Then you have your find and replace color. So really quickly, I'm just going to add a couple of buttons in here. Let's go. I'm going to change the button color to just bright red. Let's go duplicate that, create a few of them. Right, now what I can do if I wanted to make all these buttons not be red anymore, I could go into the button color, just copy this down the bottom here, copy the code, or if I know that it's just bright red, I can just do that or move the sliders, whatever, but make sure I know what the color is. Then I go back into my profile, I can find a color, paste it in this one. You have to delete the last entry and re-add it, whatever. So now it's going to look for that color and let's replace it with, I don't know, something obvious, bright green. I can hit replace, it'll go through the entire profile on every single panel and find that color and replace it with a different color. So that way, if you want to change the entire palette, you've created a whole bunch of panels and buttons and you've made them this specific sort of color for your profile and you decided you want to change your mind, this allows you to go through and quickly sort of change every single button to match. And that can be done with, like as an example, the same thing for the borders. So if we go back to widgets and I check the border color, go back, this was the border color now, and I want to replace that with blue, and it's replaced all of the border colors with blue. The next one is the build help file. This will create like a text document of every panel and button and the commands associated with it for ease of reference. So if I build a help file now for this, it'll tell me, it puts it in the custom profiles folder, and then I can also display it. In this case, we've got a whole bunch of buttons called new button, and they don't have any commands associated with them or anything like that. But if I was to quickly create a command for this, I don't know, like press P, right? And then go back here and build the help file, display the help file. Which button did I put it on? The bottom one. And so now you'll see like on press, it says press P. There's no on release command and there's no toggle, repeat, or transition actions. And then you got the summary here of like number of panels and buttons. And that essentially covers what's on the profiles panel. Right, now we can have a look at the panels panel. So on the panels panel, panel sub panel, this is essentially all of your individual panels for your profile. As you can see up here, the profile is profile for video, and then this is the main panel. The main panel is always created when you create a profile, it creates the first panel called main. If I wanted to add another one, let's call it panel 2 for the sake of this, and then add that panel. Now I'm going to have, it's going to shift over to panel 2, but it's still the same profile. And in our panels list, we have main, and we have panel 2 that we can switch between for editing. Now if I have this set up like template, say I want all of my buttons to be this, whatever, and this is kind of like a template I want to work with, right? I want all of my panels to sort of start like this. Let's just now call this template, and then I can hit duplicate panel, and now this is going to call it template, and we go to the template, it's going to be exactly the same. Now let's say I want to delete panel 2. That's what the delete button's for. You just hit delete, it'll say, do you want to do it? Yes. Now all I have is main panel and the template. I'm going to go back to main and move a couple of buttons around just so it's easy to distinguish. The next thing on the panels panel, we have the background image. So we can select the background of the panel. So glow grid, so like GC gray, etc. It's just simply whatever pictures and or animations or GIFs that you have in that custom backgrounds folder, they will appear here. And including, you'll see the Crusader indices.zip, so you can have an animated background. Now you'll notice that this will just keep playing on loop, which may not be what you want. You may want it to play once. So this background play once, this is true for essentially every widget, which we'll get into, but background play once and overlay play once, because your overlays are the same. We can select an overlay image, set it as that. Selecting this will make it so when you enter this panel, either in the editor or on the client, it will play once and then stop. And the same is true for overlays. So we'll leave that like that for now. And that's the sort of panels panel. Before we move on to all of the widgets, up the top here, you obviously have your sync, which we covered in the syncing section. That'll just make this appear on the client. You have reload assets. This button is for if you, for example, have I don't know, button.png, and that's one of the images you're using, but then you modify it slightly, but it's still called button.png because the images are cached in the software. This will sort of empty the cache and reload it, so it'll change inside the app. If you use a different image and change it, it doesn't matter. And then test profile. What test profile does is it will bring up a window exactly to the size of what you've set your profile to test what the profile will look like on the client. So for the purpose of this real quick, I'm just really quickly go to widgets and set a transition. Go to the template one, it's top left button, and if I go to the template, I'll make the bottom right one, sorry, bottom left one. Go back to main. Okay. So now if we test our profile, it's going to load that up as if it was going to look like on the client, and we can test the buttons and stuff, how that's going to work. Up the top right here, you notice this white X. This is for where we set in the server how to get out of the clients in both the editor, and it also applies as another option is same on the client side. So if I quickly go back into the config and I change this from white to transparent and go back in and test it, you notice now that you can't see it, it's not there. The button is still there, so you can still press it, but it will be completely transparent, so it doesn't interfere with the way that your profile looks. By default it's white, so you know, but if you don't want it to show, still be there taking up that little bit of space, so don't put a button, I suppose, that's tiny directly on top of it, or you'll push it, but essentially that's what that's for. I'll just go turn it back on now so we can see it easy. Right, and that covers sort of what these buttons up the top here do. Okay, what we're going with now is we'll go through the widgets subpanel and all of the actual widgets that you can add and edit. Now I've just cleaned the profile up a little bit to make it easier to work with this, so it's not all cluttered. And just a reminder, if you want to put in custom imagery or sounds or animation GIFs and stuff like that to create your widgets with, you do that if you go back to a file manager and open the custom assets folder. That's going to bring up this folder here, and then in here, if you want custom backgrounds, they go in the custom backgrounds images. If you want custom button images, then they go in the custom button imagery. Icons for the buttons go in the custom icon images, and so on and so forth. Fonts, some of them will be empty, like clocks. Clocks don't have any imagery assets, but it keeps the clock presets in a presets folder under clocks. So everything will have essentially like presets inside their respective folder. And then custom profiles have all your actual profile information. So they're not assets, but that's where the profiles get saved. So now if we go back into the editor, we've got obviously still the three buttons at the top up here, the profiles, panels, and widgets. And we have add, remove, and duplicate. And so while we're on the widgets panel, if we hit add, because we don't have a widget type set and we don't hit add, nothing will happen. But if we select a widget type, for example button, and hit add, it's going to add the default button. We hit remove. You see when you have a widget, which is what we call anything in here, like buttons, images, all that sort of stuff, we just all colloquially called widgets. You'll have this little resize indicator there where you can resize things from. That will be highlighted green to let you know which thing you have selected. Whichever thing you have selected, if you hit remove, it's going to delete that. And then if you hit duplicate, it's going to create a copy. So if we change this button, change the button color, I don't know, anything we change about this button, When we hit duplicate, it's going to create an exact copy, including all of the imagery, commands, physical position, size, everything. It's going to create an exact duplicate on the panel that you're working. That. The next one is your presets. So let's say I have this button here, and just kind of similar in a way to duplicate. I want to save that. I'm just going to call it a test, and save the preset. If we want to add another one of the exact same button, we can go into our presets, select the one that we've saved, and hit add. Now changes to add preset, and push that, and it's going to create a duplicate, a copy of the preset. Same thing, exact same position, commands, everything associated with that. Widget types, we have the 6 widget types here. Buttons, which we were just using, images and slash label, clock, joystick, slider, and pop-outs, and we'll go through those one by one. We'll start with the button. Button options is your next drop down. You have the button style, features, label style, icon style, size and position, and the button commands. So we'll start on the button style subpanel here. We can see the button color, which we just, so let's change that. And then the border color. Let's make it green. And orange. Okay, so we've just changed our border color and our button color. That's what they do. If you switch between buttons, it's going to change these to reflect whatever you have selected. We have border size, which changes the size of the curve on the border. And these borders are a vector, which means like fonts, they scale kind of indefinitely and they maintain their clarity. So even though we're making this bigger, it's not like as if it was a picture and this becomes bigger as well. It's like a vector border around the actual shape. And it will confine any imagery that you put in there. So if we put, let's pick something that's square. There we go. This power button's kind of square. So if we make that into a circle, I might set the button color so it's easy to see. You can see that this border will trim the outside of the actual image itself. So you could have just a big square rectangle image, and if you make it a bit big so it doesn't reach now, you can increase the border size and wrap it a bit further so that it encompasses that and make a circle button. And so the next thing is the line width, which is the width of the line on the border. Pretty self-explanatory. You can change that to be whatever size that you want. The next two are your image up and image down. So this is the image that displays in the up state, which it's in now, and the image that displays in the down state. Default is essentially just a semi-transparent square, which is why it looks like this. But I could change it to anything, and it will change that in the button down. Then you have your sound up and your sound down. So the sound up is the sound that will play when you release it and it moves into the up state, and the sound down is the sound that will play when you push it or it moves into the down state. So we can set those, like up or low beep and down, I don't know, this is high beep. You see it's not making any sounds now when I push it. If I go back into config, this play sounds in editor is unchecked. I can check that, go back in, and now we'll play the sounds in the editor. There's another checkbox back here also for play received sounds. This applies to both when you receive sounds from the client and also when you're in the editor. When you're in the test environment here, this is essentially acting as if you were receiving commands. It doesn't send commands, so like if you had this set to press F1, for example, it's not going to press any commands. but it will behave functionally as if it was actually running on the client. Then every button you can individually set the volume for the beeps. So obviously that was pretty loud. Make it a bit quieter. It's still pretty loud. Yeah, we can make it a bit quieter still. Way down to like very, very quiet. The next thing, play once on press. This applies to if you have animations set as your images. So if we go to image up and we set it to GIF, we'll see that it doesn't have play once on press. So when you load the profile, it's just going to keep playing it. So if we go to the test environment, see the same thing. It'll just keep playing this GIF essentially in a loop. Or we can do play once on press, which means it's just going to play once when the button's pushed and then stop. And it's the same is true for button down. If we had it set as a GIF for button down, and this applies to both the button up and down, we push it, it's going to play the GIF once, and then when we release, it's going to stop and play the up GIF once. That's essentially covers off on the options for button style. The next thing in the button is the features. So we have toggle. We can set it to yes, and now when we push it, toggle to the down state, and push it again, it'll toggle to the up state. And there is text for down state and for the up state. There's also icon for the down state and icons for the up state. You get repeat options, none while held, and loop for if you have macros set. None is obviously it just sends those commands once. While held will mean like while you're holding it down, it will continue to send the command till you release it, and then loop, especially if you have it like on a toggle, you turn it on and it will keep playing the macro in a loop until you toggle it off. Transition, this is what allows you to shift between panels. So we have two panels with our template and our main panel. And when you push the transition, you get the options here, whether you want to go to main, template, none, or even the previous screen. And so if we set it to main, because we're on the template panel, and we can set the transition type, there's all different bunches. There's like a fade, wipe, fallout, card. Let's just pick card for the purposes of this test. And we now go in and test the profile. See that pushing that, the card is a slide over from the left, from the right. And that covers off on what's on the features subpanel for the options here. The next options that button have is the label style. So this lets you change, I suppose, the text that's on the button. So let's just call this button up for ease so that we know that it's in the button up state. And let's actually change our image just to be default so it's easy to see. And we'll make down the default. Okay. And so you'll see that while it's not set to a toggle button, it just always shows you the up label. But if we set it to being a toggle, it's going to change between the up label and the down label based on the toggle. The toggle itself will toggle anything that's connected and on other panels that has the same name and is a toggle button. So for example, if I created another button even on this panel, I'll just use duplicate for ease. If this was a toggle button, then it will also toggle this when the server's running. So that it maintains the states of all of your similar or like toggle buttons across all panels, on all connected devices. The next thing is our vertical alignment. We'll just make the text a bit smaller so it's easier to see this. But obviously it's center now, but we can make it top, we can make it bottom, center, left, you know, right. And then if it's not exactly where you want, so let's say you wanted it to be at the bottom, but that's too low, you can just put it in the center and a couple of enters to get down to like where you want it to be. And then same for if it's aligned to the right, you just put a couple of spaces in there to shift it across. Label scale, this just scales up and make it absurdly large or absurdly small. Then you have your label color. So this applies to the whole label in itself. If you want to take the label off, rather than like make it nothing here, it's better off just to leave something there, even if it's just the default. And just go into the label color and shift the transparency all the way back to 0. Then it's essentially invisible. That transparency is this alpha. So for all of the things that you do with color, you have the clicker over here where you can quickly choose a color. If you click and drag on the color, it changes like the brightness of the colors. Or the other thing you can do is sort of change the vibrancy or the saturation and stuff here. So this essentially, if I make it like bright orange, the alpha is how transparent it is, this A. Then you have your saturation, and then you have your vibrancy. So let's say you wanted it to be sort of semi-transparent, you can put this, and the text will be semi-transparent. But if you just wanted it to be darker and not transparent, well then you would leave the alpha full and just bring like the vibrancy down a bit so it's not as bright. Now it's dark, but it's not transparent at all. And that applies to all of the color widgets. The outline color, so this puts an outline around the edge of text. It's set to black here and it's kind of hard to see because of the black background. But if I was to set it to, I don't know, like red, now you can kind of see there's the red around the outline of the text, and we can change that size of that outline as well. And then last thing, we can change the font. So that's in the label style. Next we have our icon style. And so this allows you to put icons. There is an icon for up and an icon for down. Right now they're blank or empty. But here we go, we got this medical for our up, and for our down, let's make it medical 2. It's a slightly different one. And we can see when we push, it changes those icons between medical and the medical 2 icon. You can move those around. So if I want it directly in the center, just put it at 0.5, 0.5, which is center. All positional stuff inside here is between 0 and 1, 0 being all the way to the bottom left, and 1, 1, which is all the way to the top right, so 100%. So if we put it 50% of the way across and 50% of the way up, it's directly in the middle. Now if we go back to our label style, let's just put this down here a little bit. Right. We want our icon maybe up a little bit more. There we go. Now we have a button. The icons have individual colors. So icon up, orange. Icon down, let's make it green. It's already kind of red, so it's going to look weird. And then the same thing with icons. You can have animated icons. So if I change, for example, the up, let's see, I'll just use this one, and I've got it set to like keep playing, so it's just going to continually play over and over. But like the other things, I can set it to just play once. and then when I push the button, it's just going to play the icon animation once, and then it's going to stop. So that essentially covers all the features on the icon style subpanel. The next one, size and position. This size and position is present for all widgets, and it shows you sort of the raw numbers of its position and size information so that you can be very precise, you can write things down, etc. So as you move it, you'll see the X and Y coordinates will change based on where you drag it around to. And then the width and height also of the button change. If you wanted to manually do it, let's say you want it to be exactly in the middle of the screen, we just want that to be 0.5, we want that to be 0.5, sorry, in height and width, so it's half the screen wide and half the screen tall, I suppose. Let's make it like that, and I don't know, something like that. Same position, if we want it directly in the middle, 0.5, 0.5, that's now going to be directly in the middle of the screen. If we wanted it to be 75% of the way along the screen, then that's going to become 0.75. Now it's going to let me put any value in here, like 21 or 27 or something, exactly to like 4 decimal places. But there's also a lock and snap to grid buttons. So what lock X will do was prevent you from dragging the button on the X axis. Right, so if I do that, I can't move it left and right, but I can move it up and down. If I do this, I can't move it up and down, but I can move it left and right. It's useful for if you want to make a row of buttons. You can just leave this locked, hit duplicate, 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 and they're all going to be directly in a straight line. I'm going to turn button sounds off because it's going to get annoying. Okay, so obviously then you've got the other one up and down. The next thing you have is the grid size and the snap to grid. So this will snap to a grid of the size that you choose. So if we make it a very big grid, see it's only going to allow us to sort of move this along a very big grid, or we can change it the size of it. So it's going to be like 0.5, make it even smaller again, etc. So you can make a whatever grid size that you want in order to help you align things. Just be mindful that if you have grid set and you click a button that doesn't comply with the grid, it's going to shift that button so that it complies with the current grid. So you see that I clicked it and it moved to a valid grid value, valid grid position. The other thing snap to grid will prevent you from doing is modifying the values outside of the grid lock. So let's say if I put 0.05 as my grid value, 0.05, so this will only accept changes of 0.5 in value. If I put a 7, it's just going to put a 5. If I put an 8, it's going to put a 1, right? It's going to round it. And as you can see, at 0.05, it's literally the exact same size as the background grid. So if you wanted to use that as a guide, 0.05 will move things exactly in alignment with the background grid. The next thing on the size and position is the send back and forward. So whenever you create something, it puts it on the next layer inside the panel. So as an example, you can see that this button is like over the top of that main button. And when you look down here, it says that it's on the top. So this is the very last button I have. If I hit duplicate and I go back to this button that I just duplicated, you'll see that it's on layer 1 and the new one is on the top. And if I want to move it backwards and forwards, I can just do the send back and bring forward to move that. This won't affect your overlay or background. It is everything inside the overlay and background, so between those two layers. And that's the size and position. And the next thing is commands. So the buttons have several different command types that you can have. There's press, down, up, type right, axis, and web browse. Press is essentially like pushing a keyboard button once, like press. Just push it, it's a down, up, and it obeys the delay between down and up that we have on our profile that we created. And so if I just put, for example, the letter P in here, I can add above, add below, and then I've also got a delay, which I can add above or below, which is the delay in this box here. Above or below won't matter if I do that when it's empty because it's just going to put it in the same place. If I put like K, for example, if I want to put it below P, I can just highlight P and push below, or I can just push below if nothing's highlighted and it will go to the bottom of the list. If I want it to go above P, I can just select P and push above. Or if I don't have anything selected, it'll go to the top of the list. So if, for example, if I put L now, with nothing selected and push above, it'll go to the top. But if I select P and push above, it's going to go above P. And then we have up, down, type right, and whatever. So down, and we use P. This is essentially like if you push a keyboard button down, or any keyboard, joystick, whatever, you push it down, and it's going to stay held. And it's not going to release it until you give it a command to release it. So if you just left your command like that, it'll hold down P and never let it go. Where this is useful is for things like if you wanted to push Alt N or something like that. You do Alt left, and you want that to go down. Then you might want like a delay of like 25 milliseconds. Then you want to press N. Then you want like maybe another delay. And then you want to release Alt left, which is the next one, up. So up Alt left will make the Alt left key go up. So it's like releasing it. So essentially what the combination of this would do is hold down Alt, press N, then release Alt. The next one we have is type right. And so what this is going to do, if I put in the lazy dog, add below, you'll get type and it'll have like a bit of a preface of what the typing is. And what that will do, it will essentially type it out. And if it'll obey capitals, so if I put a capital Z, it'll type out, it's weird, the lazy dog with a capital Z. You don't have to like enter some sort of shift command in amongst the text or anything like that. And so if we use like a combination of these things, let's say we wanted to enter a console command and tilde is our console key. We'd want to press tilde, right? Then we might want to delay for a little bit. And then we're going to want to type right something. Then we want to delay a bit more. Then we want to press enter. Then we want to maybe delay again. And then we want to exit the console, which again might be, I put type enter. We have to change this to press. So this is going to push tilde, have a bit of a delay, type in that console command, a bit more of a delay, push enter to execute the console command, a little bit more delay, and then push tilde to close the console again. And this is, you could just make a quick button that'll quickly type in console command. As you can see, to remove commands, you just push the little X that's beside the command, and you can add, you can remove any one from anywhere. So I could remove this one directly from here. I could remove that one. I could remove that one. It doesn't have to be in any order, and this scrolls. So if you had, I don't know, press G for 600 times for whatever reason, you can scroll through. The next thing we have is axis, and you'll see it when we get to joysticks and stuff, a bit more of an implementation of this. But this allows you to send a command that will set one of the either the GTC gamepad or GTC joystick axis to a specific value. So let's say I wanted to set the GTC joystick X axis to like I don't know 50% or something. The axis have a value of -1 to +1, with 0 being essentially recentered or nothing. So if I wanted to push sort of I don't know halfway forward on the stick, that's going to be halfway between 0 and 1, and that's going to look like joy and the axis, and then 0.5, which is halfway to 1, which is essentially halfway between centered and 4. If I wanted to set it back to center, then I would use axis 0. And if I wanted it to bring it like halfway back, it'll be -0.5. And it will look like this. And the last thing we have is web browse. So if I wanted to open up urkel.games, for example, I can just put in urkel.games in there, add below. Then when I push this button on my client, it's going to open that web browser on my server, on my PC. It won't open it on the client. I've prevented the client, denied the client access to the internet, essentially. But it will be a quick shortcut to open like browser windows on your PC using your default browser. So you could have an entire profile dedicated to sites that you often visit for the game that you play, or sorry, even just a panel within the game profile that you have, and those will open them up. Now, as you saw, like Alt left is a a command to hold down Alt left. How do we know what all the commands are? So two ways. Let's say I added in, I misspelt Alt left, or I didn't really know, and I put left Alt and tried to add that. The browser will allow anything, but press. It's going to say that that's an invalid command, and it will show valid commands. Will bring up the list of all the valid commands. So here's some examples of doing joysticks. Here's some invalid examples of doing joysticks. So you can't like put another line and have another value in there. How to do the delays, and then how to do random delays, which I didn't cover, and I'll cover that now. And then also your symbols. You've got modifiers, alt controls up here. You've got your special keys, multimedia, so play, stop, volume up, down, and stuff like that. So you can create like a media remote control on your phone or something like that. Mouse buttons, numpad. The other way to bring that up is just to push the little I that's next to the command section. So for delays, if you wanted to add, as we've been doing, a normal delay, it's in milliseconds. Just hit that add, and it adds the delay. If you wanted to add a random delay between 1 and 5 seconds, you put a comma, say 1000 milliseconds to 5000 milliseconds, and that's going to add a delay. Could be 1001, could be 2000, could be 3000. Every time this command loops through, or every time you action it, that delay will be randomized between the two values that you set. And that essentially covers off on buttons. Next widget type we have is the image labels. So we just go up to our widget type here, select image label, we'll add the default one in, move this out of the way. We've still obviously got our grid set to that 0.5, so as you can see, it's just like snapping here. In the image style, it has a lot of the same features that we covered in the button. You can select the image from your list, which is in your custom images folder. Whatever the case may be. Change the image color. Again, same as all the other image color selectors. You can push the color here. You have your alpha, which is transparency, and you have your V, which is vibrancy, S is saturation, and then your RGB value on itself. We have our border size. You can't see this because it's a black border, so let's change the border color so we can see it. Same as the buttons, we have the border size here. We also have the border color, and we also have the line width, just like on the button. Again, we can make the border sort of like bigger than our button itself and create it into a circle. And you'll notice that it's kind of squishing, stretching the image. But we might not want that, so we can hit the next button, which is keep ratio, and that's going to maintain the ratio of the image, but still be confined by the border. And then again, our play once on entry for if we have like a GIF or something. So I don't have it selected now, so it's just playing over and over. If I did play once on entry, it's going to just play once and then stop. And then every time I enter this screen, it's going to do the same thing. If we go into test now, see I entered this screen, so it's going to play once and then it's going to stop. I go here, come back, it's going to play it again. The next section we have for images is the label style. Again, we can just like delete that entirely because it's not a button, so it doesn't refer to the label in any way. So now we just have the image, we got no text at all. But if we did have text in here, we have all the sort of same options. We can vertically align it, top, center, bottom. We can horizontally align it, left, center, right. You can do again minor adjustments just by adding a couple of spaces into your actual thing. You have your label color, and you have your outline color, and the outline size, and the font. Fonts go in your custom fonts folder, like all the other custom things. They go in the custom folder of their respective sort of subfolder. And then we have our size and position. We won't cover this again. If you just skipped straight to image labels and not buttons, go look at the I'll go see the button section. This is the same for every widget. Right, so the next widget type is our clock. Add our little default clock in here. This is what it looks like by default when you add one. The clock options is the first one. The first one in all of them is the style. So the clock style, again, we can add an image. The background, this comes from your images folder. So custom images is where the images for the clock comes from. Just add whatever. Same, you could do an animation or so like animation or GIF. And if you didn't watch the images tutorial section or the buttons tutorial section, check out those. They cover images for GIFs and they work in the exact same way. So the purpose of this, we'll just leave it as an image. You change the background, so obviously you get the color overlaid on top of the background there. You have your border size, same as the other things. The line width for the border, same as everything else. The border color. Like the images, we can keep ratio. So if we have an image that we want as a background, we can set it to keep ratio, and it will stop the image from stretching to fill the border of the clock widget. And we also have allow stretch. So this will keep the actual physical size. And the same is true for the image widgets. And the play once on entry, again, you can have animations as the background. They work in the same way as the buttons and images widget. It'll play the animation once when you enter that screen. For label style, clocks are much better now than in the past, right? So we have options. We can just switch between 12 and 24-hour time. We can turn the seconds on and off. We can change our UTC value. Local, we'll get this from your computer as well as obey daylight savings, or you can pick a specific UTC value. Again, you have the text options for vertical and horizontal alignments. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, text color, pretty self-explanatory, and also outline of the text, like all the other text that we have, and the outline size, and then again the font. So now we have our sick retro clock. And then size and position, again, size and position is the same for every widget. If you want to see how all of this stuff works and you didn't watch the tutorial on buttons, go and look at the buttons section. So the next widget type is the joystick. Add our little default joystick in here, make him a bit bigger. So the way this works is it's essentially like a thumbstick from a gamepad. If we go into test the profile, we can see that this essentially acts exactly like that, and it's confined. If you see the edge of the inner thumb pad is confined by the red, which is the outer, and then the white is your sort of inner background. So you have your outer background, you see denoted by the red line here, and essentially the invisible background color, and the outer background is essentially blank in this case. You have your inner background, which is this white section, the inner line color, which is also white, so you can't see it. I'll change it to blue, which is around there. And then you have your inner background image, and then you have your joystick pad, which is the gray bit, which doesn't move in the editor, so that you can actually move. But that's the gray bit. The pad line color. So if we made this simple orange, it's hard to see, but it's like around the edge. And then the pad background itself. So the outer background image don't necessarily need too much, or the inner background. You can kind of use both, but you really only need one. Two, I suppose most important is the red, which confines your inner. So if we select a pad background, let's set it's a sci-fi thumbstick. Okay, let's set that. So if we test that now, that's what we're kind of moving around that. And that could be, anything. What's another one? Three. Yep. Thumbstick sci-fi. Okay, our little sci-fi thumbstick. Now our inner background, if you change that to something else, inner background image. Okay, like that. And now if we test that, see that that's kind of like that. Maybe this is kind of too big, which is fine. We can fix that on the next page. And maybe it's confined too much. So we could change our outer background image. And we'll turn that to none. And our outer background color transparent. And now it kind of looks the same, except this is applied to the background instead of the inner background. Let's take out our powered line cutter. We'll make that visible so we don't have it anymore. Let's also take off our inner for now. Don't really need that. And that essentially has given us the start of our joystick style. Next one we have is behavior. So this changes our outer size, and that's also how confined the inner sort of pad is. You change the inner size, which really just changes the picture, and then the pad size, we can make that so it's exactly fitting to where we want. We can change all the line widths as well, but we've basically got two of them turned off, so we can only see the red one. I usually leave the outer one on until I'm finished, so that when I'm testing it, I can see where it's getting confined. Joystick's getting confined. And then you can pick which axis you want it to use. So the device type is set to joystick, and it has all these axes. This is X. We'll just leave it at X and Y for now. But you also have the option for none. And then we can do show values. Now this ties into where you want to send like button commands and send the axis value. So by enabling this, it allows you to see what you would need to type in to move it that specific distance. So we have sticky mode on and off. If we turn sticky mode on, for example, we go into test profile. Sticky mode means that where you move it, it will stay. So let's say you were trying to set up like a panning camera and it's like, oh, this is kind of like the perfect speed. Well, now I know my Joy X and Y values that I need to put into a button command for it to be set like that. So that pretty much covers up on the behavior subpanel. Our sticky, our pad sizes, and then what device. If we have gamepad, then it's going to tell us it should be Gpad X or Gpad Y, and then the value. And then again, we have size and position. Again, same for every widget. You have the size and position panel functions in the same way. If you didn't watch the one on buttons, go and check that out. It has the description of this in the button tutorial. So the next widget we have is the slider. Um, this is the slider by default. You have your background color, which is this sort of solid light gray here. You have your track, which is this sort of darker gray line in the middle, which it runs on, and then you have your thumb slider, which is the green thing here. Now, when you make like custom imagery for this, my suggestion is to kind of use the background, and I'll show you that now. So if I change the background to be this image here, you can see that the background is kind of behind track. So we can either make the track blank, just by making it transparent, or we could set the actual track image to be blank. There's several ways to do that. And then for the thumb, then we can choose our sort of thumb slider image as well. And so we can change all the colors like we just went through with that. Then the last option on the style panel is the play preset button animations once. So if you can make all these into animations, and so I'll make as an example, make them all sort of same animation. Change the track. So the thumb. So now you see that these are all the animations, and this is not going to affect those in any way. Anyway. But when we get to the buttons, if we have this set, it's going to play the animations once when you press the button. Or if it's unchecked, it's going to loop indefinitely like this. So we'll check that for now. I'm going to change these back so that they're a bit easier to see what's going on. Okay. And so the next one is behavior. And so in the behavior, we can change the slider type from a horizontal to a vertical. This isn't going to automatically change all your imagery and shape of the actual thing for you. So as an example, I'll just move this one off to the side and I'll add a brand new one in. If you have trouble moving it, just move the slider all the way to one edge and it's easier to move. Because it prioritizes grabbing the slider. If I change this to vertical, you'll see it hasn't rescaled this, it's still kind of inside this shape. We'd have to do that, sort of scale the background and the slider, and then change our imagery to match what this would be. So if we did that with this one, it kind of doesn't change your imagery. It changes it to scale as a vertical one and operate as vertical, but it doesn't change all the images. An easy way to do it, if you find it difficult to do that, is if you just go into presets. I have a horizontal preset and vertical presets in here. So if you want to do a vertical one, you could just, for example, add the sci-fi vertical and then modify this. It might be a bit easier. Okay, so that's the difference between horizontal and vertical. Then we have our min and max values. So as I mentioned in the joystick, all of the axes are from -1 to +1. In this case, for the x-axis, that means that -1 is all the way to the left and +1 is the joystick all the way to the right. And here we can set these sort of values to make the joystick behavior be different. So as an example, if I set the minimum value here to 0, that means that this is essentially the center of the joystick, and this would just move it all the way to the right, and I can't go left. If I was to swap that around and change the max value to 0, then this would be the center of the joystick, and I can only move it all the way to the left. And then step size is, as you see here, like I can get to 0.01. Right, so every one of those is sending a command to move. So you have like 100 commands to get to the middle, sorry, 50, and then 50 to get to the other side. And that's sort of the fidelity. And that's just only obviously going to have 10 commands between left and right. So it depends how much fidelity you want. You can set that. Then you have your axis and axis type. Like I said, in this case, it's the x-axis, and then the device type is joystick. So that was 100 between 0 and 100 the other way. So it'd be 200 at max. And you can choose between gamepad. If you choose gamepad, you only get 6 axes because that's how many axes a gamepad has. And the joystick has 8 axes because that's how many the GTC joystick has. So this is where you switch between the GTC joystick and GTC gamepad and what this is controlling. Then you have your 3 preset buttons, which correspond to your 3 preset values here. They don't have to be in order. Like I can put preset 3 as the lowest value, preset 1 and 2. It doesn't matter, it's just 3 options for you to use to have preset values for your slider. So if you wanted to example have, I will add this one back in for a second. Let's say we had something like this on our flight panel and we wanted to make it so that this was our vertical strafe for people not using joysticks, and this value here is a good value for like taking off. Put it down as a good value just for landing slowly. We can change this is like preset 3, right? So we can change this value to be like sorry, the other way around. -0.2, right? And so we have our like axis in the middle, and when we come into land, we just push that. It's going to set that axis just to a little bit of down strafe, and then you can land softly. Or you may have this set up to be like an absolute value for weapon convergence or something like that, and you can set different values for what you want your weapon convergence to be. So like if you're going to shoot troops on the ground, you might want it to be very close. If you know, doing distance shooting, you want it to be far away, etc. But that's what these are for. The next we have our that's a behavior. Next we have value label, and so this is for the value label here as we move it. We have the same sort of standard things. We can change the color, we can change the font, and we can change the font size. Then we have our format. So between raw, which shows you the -1 to +1, or we can set it to percentage, which -1 or 0, like a throttle, is all the way at 0%, and then the other side is 100%. Then we have our label position, so we can use this to sort of move it around, put it off screen if we don't want. If we don't want to label it all, it's easy enough to just change the color, change the alpha to 0, make it transparent, then we don't have a label. Next we have our 3 preset buttons. I'm just going to cover one because they're functionally all pretty much the same. By default, that's their button up and button down. We can change the button up and down images here. So in case of this opens up buttons in your button images folder, like custom button images. If I set it to that animation, we're going to see that it only plays once when we push it, because we've set it on that style panel that the animation button's only press once. Turn that off and push it, it's just going to keep playing sort of forever, or when you load the screen it will be playing forever. One thing to be mindful of, I'm just going to set this to back to blank, solid rather, so it's easy to see. That this slider here takes precedence over the buttons in terms of clicking. So if I put this preset button too close to the slider, it's not actually going to let me push the button because it's always grabbing the slider. So just be mindful, if you put it too close, it's going to grab the actual slider instead of the button itself. Okay, then we have, again, like we're just showing, we have our color, the other colors, we can change the color of the buttons. We have the font of the text in the button that we can change. And as we just demonstrated, we have the position of the button as well that we can change. Now, if you, for example, don't want the buttons at all, my suggestion would be to make their size essentially 0 so that you can't see them and you also can't click on them. And then we have the font scale, so we can increase the size of the font for the buttons. Text color itself, and then pick a sound, and then we have our sound volume. And so that pretty much covers the preset buttons. And then we have the size and position. Again, if you didn't watch the custom button, the size and position are the same for every single widget. So go and watch that and you'll see how that works in more detail. And for now, the last widget type that we have is the Popout. Functionally, the Popouts are essentially like having another smaller panel inside your main panel that you can animate open and close. So the first options we have in the Popout is General, and this has a button to toggle between the open and closed state. Doesn't matter where you move it in between that unless you sort of save the state. Toggling between them will take them back to their open and closed state. The next two buttons are the capture open and closed positions. So if I want this to be sort of the open state here, I can capture the open position. See if I toggle now, that is now what the open state looks like. And if I want to capture the closed state, I can move that. Say I want it to just be like sort of down here or something, and capture that. Now that's the closed state. They don't have to be in that state to capture it. So if I'm in the open state, I can sort of just resize it, move it down here, capture the closed position, and be captured. The next is the animation duration, so how long it takes to animate. So if we make it up to 1.2 seconds, see now it takes 1.2 seconds to open, 1.2 seconds to close, all the way up to 5 as the max, and then 0.5 as the default, and we can make it faster. Now the next option we have is the open state, and this is going to edit it whilst it's in the open state, which by default has the green border, and the closed state by default has the red border. We have background images and overlays just like the main panel does. So we can change our background image, and we can change the overlay. By default, the overlay is kind of alpha off, so make it visible first. And we can add our overlay on top of that. And now if we go back here, we can see that that is just for the open state. And then same thing, we can change the colors, background color, change the overlay color. We have outline width, so how thick the outline is around it. And we also have border size. So we can essentially make like sort of circle panels. For now, we'll just bring it back to something like this. Then we have our play background once and play overlay once. So these apply to animations. If we have, for example, a background animation, if we set this to not play once, so it's unchecked, then every time we open it, it's going to continue to just play this in a loop. If we set it to play once, then we open it, it's just going to play the animation once and then stop, just like how all the other animation play onces work, except this time it's not on entry to the screen or on press, it's on state change. And then we have the same option for the overlays. By default, the outline color, as you see here, is green for the open state, and if you go to the closed state, which is the second option, the outline is by default red. You can sort of remove these, so if I go, for example, and I change the alpha to 0, then it's not there at all. And if I was testing that, then it would just appear like this. I would recommend that while you're still editing, that you leave the border on, and I'll talk about why in a minute. I won't go through all the options for the closed state. They're essentially the same as the open state, but they affect it whilst it's in its closed state. And the size and position functions in the same way the size and position does for all of the other widgets. I suggest watching the button one if you haven't seen how the size and position works. Now the reason I suggest leaving the borders on while you're editing until you're finished is because the way this functions is when it is in the open state, or when the last pop-out you've selected is in the open state, when you add other widgets, they get applied to the actual pop-out itself. So if I was to go in now, this is in our open state, so it's in our open state, and we select button, and we add that, the button is now inside our pop-out. When you move things within the pop-out, it blocks you from putting stuff outside, and you can see that the scale of the button is essentially like as if this was a full-size panel. And when we move this in here, it will scale and move with the pop out, and that's true for all widgets. So if I add an image label, default image there, if I add clock, joystick, slider, essentially any of the widgets you add get added to this. And now when you change between the open and close state, they go with it and animate with that. Now the way that these pop-outs open and close when they're actually essentially not inside the editor like this, because it doesn't do anything inside the editor, is anywhere you click that doesn't have an interactable widget will open and close the pop-out. You see as I select widgets, it selects between the widget types in the panels over here. If I select anywhere in the pop-out itself that doesn't have a widget, it'll get into sort of where the widget is. But also when you're running, images don't have an interaction, so they also count as being clicked through to the pop-out. And so I'll show that now. If I go to test and I go into the template, anywhere I click in here that has a widget, like I can move the joystick, I can push the buttons and do the sliders. The clock is sort of doesn't pass through, but if I click the image, you'll see that it will change state. Or if I click anywhere blank, it will change state. So you can use images as like, almost like if you want to have like a button that opens and closes, you can use that. Now, another reason that this is useful is because you can save this as collections of widgets. So I'm just going to create, I'm going to remove this one and I'll create another one to use an example. Let's remove this. I'll add another default one. I'm just going to set the open state like this. And I'll set the closed state kind of like here. In fact, actually, I will capture them both. Capture open, capture close. So now they're essentially the same. And if we took this border away, we wouldn't even know. So we put this in the open state. Let's now say we want to get some buttons. Add a button in there. We add a whole bunch of buttons in here. Let's say this is like something that you wanted to be able to add easily to like any panel, right? This is a collection of buttons that do certain things. So when you save these presets, it saves everything in the preset and everything that's an attribute of everything inside the preset. And because the open and close state are essentially the same, we've added our buttons. Let's go through now and the open state and essentially turn our border off. Go to the close state and turn our border off here. Now we have a collection of buttons that we can move around as a single sort of entity. And because our open and close states are exactly the same, clicking near them like doesn't do anything. Click all the buttons, but clicking around doesn't. Now, what we can do is save that as a preset. So let's say collection, and we save that preset. And so like now, if I remove this, and I've got some previous ones saved, so if I select the sci-fi power preset, now we have all of our power buttons that we can just move around like that. So it creates essentially like your own custom widget that is a combination of a bunch of widgets. And the one we just created was called collection, so we can add that in now and we can move that around, which is sort of super handy. And that's pretty much the pop outs and how the pop outs work. Right, so now we've finished making our like super retro, extremely scuffed profile. If we want to put that onto the client, all we're going to do is hit the sync up the top here, get our prompt, and we're going to find our profile for video that we made. We can load it up, and now we have this running on our client. All of our sort of scuffed retro widgets that we created here. Got a little white X up here. It's kind of hard to see, but we don't want that to sort of ruin our immersion. So we can go back, change it to transparent, load it back up, and now that's gone. But it still functions. So that pretty much covers on the server side. What I'll do now is cover off on the client itself. So the first thing I have on the client, obviously our big green power button. You use this to start the actual client itself and connect it to the server. In our config, we have our device information here. We have a toggle between selecting auto connection and manual. By default, it's on auto. You can't change the server IP and port, and you can set the password if you want to, and change the client name. You set it to manual. This is where you can put in the manual server address. And the port. And if I was to go back and connect now manually, this is now using the manual connection. We'll put him back to auto. Then you have your play button sounds. So this will depict whether or not button sounds will play on the client or not. You have your exiting profile stops macros button. So in this case, if you, for example, were in a profile and this button sort of made a macro run on loop, whenever you exit out of the profile, that's going to tell the server, hey, stop running any macros, so that you don't accidentally leave one running from a profile that you had loaded. Verbose logging, by default, this is off. I suggest leaving it off unless you have errors. If you have errors or something, a crash, turn this back on, because it will affect the performance of the application itself. And that way, if it does crash, it should be logged, and then you can pull those logs from the server. Then we have our profile exit button color. At the moment, I've got it transparent, but we can change it to white or black. So if I put it to white, like we just had our test profile before, we have the big white, sort of, well, not big, but we have the white exit circle up here in the corner. Having it transparent, the button's still there, it just means that you can't see it. And then lastly, we have our load on connect. So if we put our test one back onto load on connect, now when we start the client and we start it, it's going to automatically load that profile. So lastly, I just wanted to give a couple of examples of it working in a game. It could be any game or application. In this case, I'm using Star Citizen. It was the original reason I started learning software development and the reason I made this software to begin with. And it'll give it an idea of kind of like the low latency and also how the joysticks work and bindings and stuff like that. And so right now I've got it loaded up, and I leave seat on here. We can see we do the leave seat command and also transition to the FPS panel automatically. And if we use the torch on and off as an example, that's like the latency we're talking about, pretty much instantaneous. Now if I get back into the seat here, in fact let's turn the torch off first. So this is how you would normally kind of like approach a ship. Again, we can do commands, including modifiers, as well as doing transitions. So we have our flight ready button. Push that, it's going to go to flight ready, and also change to our flight panel. HAL ATC's in the same position, so you literally hit flight ready, hit HAL ATC, and it would call HAL ATC. Now we have a slider here. As I mentioned during the earlier parts of the video, these are all unbound by default, so it doesn't make any conflicts. So I'm just going to go quickly bind this and show you how that works. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to the server and load up the profile in the editor and go to the flight panel, which is here by selecting our panels and then choosing flight from here, and then click on our little slider here. Make sure we have widgets selected, and that's going to bring up the slider. Go to behavior, and in this case it's set to joystick already, but it has no axis. So we're just going to set that to, let's just go X. So the X axis of our GTC joystick. Cool. Then we're just going to quickly sync back to the client to update it on the client. And now this will be moving the GTC joystick X axis. And we can confirm that. We just hit back on the server, and we can see this will spam with the axis controls as we go through and move them. Okay, so now we have it bound to the X axis. In something like Star Citizen, we're going to go into the options. We're going to go to keybinds, joystick HOTAS, because the GTC joystick counts as a joystick or a HOTAS. Go to advanced controls. In this case, we're going to use flight movement, and we're going to do, let's go speed limiter absolute. Now we click on this, and when it says waiting for input, you just go and move the axis here, and it's going to bind that to that input. Now we can go back, and we can see that now our x-axis is bound to the speed limiter absolute of our ship. Now, if you already use your joystick for something like this, obviously you can't use two of the same inputs. So because now we have the gamepad enabled, what we can do is set it to the gamepad instead. If you want to make some automatic cinematics panning, go to the cinematics panel. I've created an example here, which uses the sort of gamepad as its binding, but you could sort of use any axis, and we'll change it just so you can see the example. Change this all to joystick so you can see it. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to bind our little thing over here to our joysticks. It's currently bound to gamepad and gamepad X and Y. So again, we can go back into the editor. Go to our panels, select our cinematics panel, go to our widgets, select our joystick widget, check behavior, set to gamepad axis X and Y. Let's just change it to joystick X and Y. And this will update to joystick when we load it. And then let's check our, also check our slider here. Let's actually use this one. What's this? Joy Z. Alright, slider. Let's go to behavior. It's currently none, so we'll set it to the Z axis on our joystick. And this is the RZ axis on our joystick, so we'll change that one as well. Right. So these are all set to joystick now. This is XY, that's Z, and that's RZ. Let's now check our example button. And you see it's going to push down gamepad 5, which is set up right now to be like pushing Z or F4, down G-pad 4, and then it's going to go through and set the G-pad axis. So we're not using the G-pad axis anymore, we're using the joystick axis. So we need to add joy x, we'll use the same value, 0.35. Oh, I'm a knucklehead. I've got it let to type press. We want to type axis. This shouldn't be case sensitive. Good, so it's going to set our joystick axis to 0.35. And then when we release it, we're going to want to set that back to 0, right? Want to make sure they both go back to 0. So let's, we don't need the G-pad stuff anymore. What we do need is to set the joystick axis back to 0. So it pushes down on our camera modification buttons, sets the joystick axis to that value, also pushes some down on the left, which is on the keyboard for panning of the camera. And this will run essentially in a loop until I turn it off, and then button up commands are here also. Now let's go back into game. So we've set this, we'll just double check. Set our joystick, our X and Y axis on a joystick. Set our sliders to our these ones, joystick Z, sorry RZ, joystick Z. Alright, cool. Need to sync that over to our client. We're going to need to go into the options now and sort of bind our controls. So if we go to keybinds, joystick HOTAS, go to vehicles, view, looks like it's already set to our X and Y axis, but we'll just do it again. We can move this thing. That sets it to the X and Y axis. Yes, I know we've got it set to our speed limiter. Oh, who cares? We want to do our up and down. So we do that. Go thing up and down. Set to X and Y now. Or we could have used these sliders and set it to RZ and R1, like that. But for the purpose of this, we use these. Now, if we go back and we were like in external view, then moving our thing here is going to move our camera around. Now, because we have our little auto panning example here, and you can include like camera positions in this command or whatever you want. When we push that, and we can put other things into that button, like switching a camera view first, switching a camera view, do some rotating, set a different view axis and stuff like that. But that's just a very simple example of what the cinematics panel has turned into more, I suppose, Star Citizen agnostic, but still will give you the same features. So that covers, I think, most of the features. It's been a lot for the new version, sort of the philosophy behind it, and trying to make it a better user experience, especially for customizing your own profiles. Hope you enjoy. Hope the removal of some of the minor features wasn't significant, too significant for anyone. And again, I'm going to look at continuing to iterate and add things as we move forward. But hopefully, the way I've built this version now is going to allow that process to be much simpler. And you can go through and enjoy the new default space in profile, modify it easily to sort of make it your own, add your animations and stuff like as you want to within in here. I've included some assets with the application, but you feel free to download your own, grab them, put them in the folders. Remember, lastly, when you need to put custom images or sounds or anything, easy ways in the file manager, open the custom assets folder, drop them in here for whichever ones they are, whether they be images or background images or icon images, etc. Drop them in here. It's been a long time coming, I know. It's taken a lot between, the full-time job and getting this out there. I hope you enjoy. Have fun.